All right. Hello, welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our session, Music, Russian Empire and the Provinces. And our next speaker is Joshua Bedford, who is a lecturer in musicology at the Middle Tennessee State University. He received his PhD in musicology from University of Georgia in 2020 with a dissertation entitled Soviet Opera, Styles and Aesthetics Under Stalin. And his research broadly deals with this subject of socialist realism, on which he's going to be speaking to us today. Joshua, please.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I'm looking forward to this paper, which is going to dive into a topic that I brushed on in the dissertation of love plots. So I'm looking forward to your comments at the end of this as I continue on this, this research. So, in Soviet literature, art, and music, the use of a love plot was often considered a disposable or auxiliary component of a work's overall plot, theme, or purpose. As an accessory, the love plot could offer a brief respite to the didactic political and social messages, or it could provide another course through which the main characters succeed along their socialist realist path. For literature, the general consensus has presumed the love plot to be peripheral to the overall narrative, and the same could be said for most Soviet operas, often referred to as just throwaway love plots, right? Yet its insignificance comes into question given the centrality of love and its representation on the stage in the 1930s. Even more, criticism focused on love as well, as is evident in the denunciation of Shostakovich's Lady Macbeth, which listed as problematic the opera's hooting, puffing, wheezing, and panting, and also complained that love was, quote, smeared over the entire opera. Even before the denunciation, Shostakovich and librettist Alexander Price tried to reduce or replace some of the heightened eroticism from their original 1932 score to the published 1935 one. As Laurel Fay has shown, the revisions and censorship led to changes to Katerina's aria, The Foal Runs After the Filly, in which both the librettist and composer abridged the stream of allusions to animal mating traits. There were also further cuts, such as a reduction of the brutal galop of Act 1, Scene 3, in which they attempted to lessen the dramatic and musical eroticism and naturalism, though ultimately coming up short. The process of toning down erotic features of the love plot was not a futile exercise of censorship for this one opera alone. This was an ongoing practice faced in other fields like literature as well. Irina Gutkin has drawn links between the love plot and socialist realist literature to the developments and dynamics of gender and sexuality in Soviet culture, especially throughout the 1930s. In the years immediately following the revolution, women were afforded more equality with men in the labor force. They adopted a new family code that made marriage a civil instead of a religious union. They simplified divorce procedures, and they recognized the rights of children born into as well as out of a registered union. However, in the 1930s, new family codes were introduced and aimed at reining in divorce rates, outlawing abortions, and many other kind of about faces from what was happening in the 20s, right? As Irina Gutkin has argued, Soviet fiction at this time as well, quote, became a crucial medium for defining gender roles and love relations in the utopian, another quote, light of the future. This new light of the future required a different approach to love relations that avoided purely erotic or spiritual types and instead sought a reconciliation between these relationships. Both the erotic and the platonic love perform specific functions in the socialist realist novel that expresses both the desire to participate in a procreative role that builds the desirable communist future physically, and the personal fulfillment of happiness in finding a suitable partner to satisfy the platonic means of these relationships. Furthermore, the new Soviet literature of the 1920s and 30s would become some of the primary material opera composers and librettists would adapt for their attempts at creating the new Soviet opera. Today, I will make some observations about the love plots in Ivan Dzerzhinsky's Tikhy Don and Sergei Prokofiev's Semyon Kotko. Both operas adapted popular novels or novellas from the 20s and 30s and preserved the love plot, albeit with some changes. For example, Dzerzhinsky drastically toned down what was labeled the steamy love plot of the source novel, the contestedly written by Sholokhov. Prokofiev and Dzerzhinsky used various approaches to highlight the love plots musically, aiding the desired goals of reconciliation between the erotic and platonic aspects of the protagonist's love. They accomplished this by shifting the protagonist's musical stylings, moving the characters from traditional set pieces of arias or monologues to marches and songs, or they use themes associated with the protagonist's love to help create a symphonic transformation as well. Finally, the love plot required a time-honored device of the love triangle to help create not just a romantic rivalry, but to establish a clear set of romantic options drawn across ideological lines. Ultimately, this love triangle would serve as a formative part of the protagonist's quest to, quote, attain consciousness. Before exploring how Dzerzhinsky and Prokofiev engaged the love plots, there is one more aspect of Soviet opera in the 1930s that can be instructive to interpretations of these love plots and how they fit into the broader complexes of socialist realism. So in addition to new Soviet works produced in the 1930s, the Soviet opera stage still performed classic operas from the 19th century, both Russian and foreign, but ultimately including one of the most popular foreign operatic works on both the Russian and Soviet stage, Bizet's Carmen. Of course, Carmen centers on the sensational love story between the guard Don Jose and the captivating Bohemian heroine Carmen. The erotic nature of this opera and its immense popularity on the Soviet stage undoubtedly represents the general paradoxes of Soviet acceptance and censorship. At face value, Carmen's eroticism, exotically portrayed through a range of physical and bodily Spanish Roma dance pieces like the Habanera and Seguidilla, should disqualify the opera from any good standing in the increasingly puritanical Stalinist state. On the other hand, perhaps the title character's demise at the hands of Don Jose might offer a morality play of sorts in which excessive eroticism is violently stamped out at the end. Of course, that didn't work with Shostakovich and Katerina either, right? Instead, the success of Carmen endured thanks to several factors, including the popularity of Carmen as an intriguing figure in the other arts, musicologists and critics' arguments in favor of Bizet over any other French or foreign composer for that matter, and the arguments for new symbolic meanings and interpretations of the opera that better aligned it with the shifting ideological landscape. Marina Raku has traced the many adaptations and reinterpretations of Carmen on the opera stage and beyond, examining how it succeeded on ideological, cultural, and musical fronts. In particular, she discussed the methods by which directors, producers, critics, and musicologists helped to de-eroticize Carmen, the opera, and more specifically, its title heroine. An example of this de-eroticization process can be found in the performances of the title role by Vera Davlidova and Maria Petrovna Maksakhova, and the critics' descriptions of their performances. Davlidova's interpretation of the Habanera, for example, sounded to some, quote, as if sang on a smile and reminiscent of the white-toothed heroines of Soviet cinema in the 1930s, end quote. Furthermore, the singer's timbres also contributed to their de-eroticized interpretations, especially in how both women utilized the lower register, which they described as, quote, light and losing its most important color or feature, its sexuality. Finally, one reviewer of Maksakova's performance remarked, quote, the unique feature of Maksakova was the charm of the feminine, devoid of even a hint of sex, end quote. While the de-eroticization of Carmen through singers' interpretations and the critics' alignment of the opera with the more puritanical cultural expectations of the 1930s, other aspects of the opera also need tweaking and updating to drag the opera ever more into the Soviet era. Discussion of Carmen's Soviet, read socialist realist, merits were just as effusive as the descriptions of the straight-laced performances and interpretations of the title role by Maksakhova and Davlidova. Citing musicologists Yuli Kremlov, Sergei Bagayevlensky, Anna Khoklovkina, and Ivan Salertinsky, Raku offers the following summary of how Carmen could be understood not only as a Soviet opera, but also as a potential model for Soviet opera. As she described, Carmen was a quintessential song opera based on genres of the everyday, such as marches and dances, written with intelligible melodies that are influenced by folk elements and built on the principles of symphonism. At the end of the opera is a social conflict which involves representatives of the proletariat and masses. The conflict also contains both an optimistic charge and centers on a familiar and timeless love theme. Essentially, musicologists reinterpreted Carmen using all the necessary watchwords of socialist realism, such as universality, intelligibility, narodnost, symphonism, optimism, and identified a familiar love plot as well as positive representatives of social or class conflict. The elements of socialist realism that they plucked out of Carmen can also be applied to making the love plots in Soviet opera more appropriate in socialist realist terms. First, there is the use of the love triangle, a time-honored device that has near universal applications in any dramatic work. As Irina Gutkin described for Soviet fiction, the love triangle is central to the structure of the socialist realist love plot and is, quote, constructed along particular ideological lines. Part of this ideological construction of love emerged in the Sovietized Carmen from the dynamic of positive and negative characteristic traits found in the opera's primary couple. For example, a review from Вечерняя Moskva in 1933 stated, quote, freed from the bourgeois traditions, the full-blooded Carmen has been transformed into a woman of a capitalist city, rebelling against the kulak possessive psychology, that the expression of which is the naive and pitiful Don Jose. Furthermore, the third member of this triangle, as you'll note in my very stunning graphic, is Escamillo, represented by the masses with his Toreador song, a piece that existed in an updated revolutionary song entitled March of the Workers and Peasants' Army. In defining the characters along ideological lines, musicologists and critics were able to further reduce the love plot from mere eroticism to a more class-conscious perspective suitable to the expectations of the time. Distinguishing between the lovers along particular ideological lines after the fact provides only some cover to the erotic elements of an opera like Carmen. The protagonist must also undergo some kind of transformation in order to reconcile the erotic and platonic by finding the appropriate mate, which was the standard approach in literature, or by shifting the musical characteristics of the protagonist, which happens in Carmen. As we see, she is shifted from the seductive and physical dance pieces of the habanera or seguidilla in acts 1 and 2 to the more cantilena-like pieces of the remaining acts. Or finally, by offering a clear and symphonic dramatic presentation through the characters' motives, which I'll play an example for you here. Carmen's fate motive juxtaposed with the Toreador song, and those in particular accompany a lot of the action all the way throughout the opera. So here's the finale of the Met's 2009 performance here. Yes, you just get a brief clip of that there. The characters' musical parameters and any accompanying motives can be used to shift from a focus on their individual romantic concerns to a broader, more nationalistically connected type of love, such as love for one's country, which often accompanied operas with historical settings. And Anna Bremen has done some excellent work on this with Prokofiev and War and Peace as well. The transformation of the protagonist can take many forms in opera, especially as it concerns the love plot, because composers can go beyond the libretto to offer symbolic musical gestures and motives to alter the musical framework of their characters and to convey this kind of dramatic progress. The Sovietization and de-eroticization of Carmen by these various means suggests a possible framework, I think, through which one can understand the socialist realist love plot in opera. First, back to the love triangle, which provides the requisite set of positive and negative relationships through which the protagonist must find the correct partner or transcend these individual concerns of love for the collective good, whether through sacrifice or by joining a collective cause. In Quiet Flows the Dawn, the protagonist Grigory Melekhov is in love with a married woman from his village, Aksinya. They elope to a wealthy estate owned by the Lesnitsky family, who are staunch supporters of the Tsarist regime. Grigory gets sent to the Western Front to fight for the Tsar against the Austrian and German forces when he is injured and believed to have been killed. Aksinya remained at the estate and is approached by the estate owner's son, Yevgeny, who's home on leave, and eventually yields to his advances. By the end of the opera, the love triangle reaches an impasse when Grigory returns and discovers Aksinya's unfaithfulness, kills Yevgeny, and leaves to join the new revolutionary forces in their fight for liberation from the Tsarist regime. For Semyon Kotko, the title character returns home to his Ukrainian village after serving in the Russian army, but much of Ukraine is still contested by German forces, the Haidamaks, and revolutionary partisans. Semyon aims to marry his beloved Sofia, but her father, who sides with the Germans and Haidamaks, intervenes. He ultimately arranges to wed his daughter to the son of a wealthy landowner, Klembovsky, whose land had been taken and redistributed by the Bolsheviks. Ultimately, Semyon returns to rescue Sofia, only to be captured and later rescued himself by the revolutionary partisans. Although he wishes to stay and marry Sofia, he is reminded of the remaining struggle for freedom and soon joins the fight. Both Dzerzhinsky and Prokofiev clearly mark their protagonists and antagonists musically as well, setting up an even more explicit set of dynamics between characters and assisting in the protagonist's transcendence of their individual desires in the end. Grigory begins the opera by singing duets with Aksinya and expounding on his love for her in monologue-like sections. By the end of the opera, Grigory's musical stylings shift a little bit more towards marches and songs, concluding with Grigory leaving the stage to the strains of the final march of Kraya do Kraya, which became very popular pretty much worldwide as well, especially thanks to singers like Paul Robeson. In Semyon Kotko, Prokofiev emphasizes the leading figures of the opera with sounds of the Ukrainian countryside by drawing from the styles and texts of Ukrainian folk songs. In contrast, he crudely paints the Germans, Haidamaks, and Sofia's father with dark, chromatic, and violent ostinato. Semyon's transformation over the course of the opera is a bit more hackneyed and unconvincing. In the final scene, Semyon voices his last wish to marry Sofia instead of returning to war, but he quickly forgets this and joins the rest of the chorus to sing "Over a Free Ukraine, Above the Blue Steppes, the detachments of partisans have stretched out in a chain forward," the big concluding word there. And in this particular song, they also use one of the opera's main themes as the melody, and kind of Prokofiev crudely juxtaposes that with a march. Prokofiev's musical choices for the finale came under question, for example, by Israel Nestiev, who described the finale as, quote, particularly disappointing in his otherwise glowing review of the opera for Sovietska Muzika. The theme in question that I just described and other themes like it can also indicate a second aspect of the love plot's framework, where a motif or motives associated with the personal drama must transform into a part of the collective drama. As in Carmen, the dances were replaced by her cantilena-like sets, while the finale juxtaposes the tragedy of her character, represented by the fate theme, with the Toreador song in the finale. Such a tragic outcome, though, would have been incompatible with the obligatory positivity in socialist realist operatic finales. Thus, simply altering a character's music stylings might not provide enough of a transformative quality expected of the protagonist. To be successful, these operas would need thematic or motivic representatives to create the dramatic symphonism that would make the operas more epic and monumental. Both Dzerzhinsky and Prokofiev relied on two distinct themes or motives for their operas to represent both the tragic elements and the love plot. For Dzerzhinsky, he uses the following theme to represent his love interest, Aksinya. It appears 12 times throughout the opera and is marked by its repetitive sighing gesture and the horns over a pedal bass and chromatically rising harmonies with each iteration of the sigh. The second theme connects all of the tragic elements of the opera, appearing when Grigory is called to war, the death of Aksinya's daughter, and associated with Aksinya's betrayal of Grigory with Yevgeny. In a review of the work for Sovietska Muzika, Andrei Budikovsky described it as the opera's main motive that links together an aspect of Grigory and Aksinya's personal drama with the societal events surrounding them. Both themes remain in the orchestra throughout, but continue statically, and neither approach any sort of real monumental quality. Even with these possible shortcomings, of course, we know the opera overall succeeded, albeit for a short time, most likely thanks to Dzerzhinsky's skillful composition of idiosyncratic folk songs and marches. Prokofiev's two themes represent similar aspects of the opera as Dzerzhinsky's had, but they are more intertwined with the characters of the opera. Nathan Zeinen has referred to the first theme as tragic, and the second, which I'll show you here, as joyfulness and as related to village life. It's this second theme that also accompanies nearly every aspect of the love plot for Semyon and Sofia, and between Semyon's sister Frosya and her suitor Mikola. This particular theme makes up a considerable amount of the character's melodies. Perhaps most written about is its presentation as Mikola's folk song in Act 3, entitled At the Crack of Dawn, which is hauntingly accompanied by the main villain, Tkachenko, Sofia's father, who is ominously watching over Semyon, Sofia, Frosya, and Mikola as he sings. But I'm going to play the presentation for you that is found at the introduction to Act 3 in the orchestra. So here it is. Okay, so I personally really enjoy this theme. And what I'm going to focus on here is how this theme, or at least fragments of it, accompany a range of moments, three of which I want to outline here. One of them is how the part of the theme appears when Semyon reunites with his mother in the first act. The second one is the duet that follows this introduction between Semyon and Sofia here in Act 3. And then finally, what I'm really going to focus on here at the end is one of the revolutionary partisans or Bolsheviks, Remenyuk, who laments his fallen comrades in Act 4, Scene 2. I want to point out just a few defining features of this theme as well. That which is used most frequently in these presentations of the theme, or at least in the fragments of the theme, is primarily its main cadential figures there. They're at the end of measure, what would that be, 6 here, and then 6, 7, 8, 9 as well. So the closing kind of the half cadence and then the full cadence there at the end. And I'll point your attention specifically to this leap of a sixth, which is followed by a diatonic stepwise fall from the third to the tonic, which can be seen here in the final measure that I've provided there. And it uses in particular a dotted quarter or a dotted eighth, followed by a 16th, and then finishes on either a quarter note or a half note. This theme represents numerous aspects of love, from the central love theme between Semyon and Sofia to Remenyuk's love for his murdered comrades who were killed in Act 3. And over the course of these various moments, the theme transforms, with each one making it a significant aspect of the composer's symphonic thinking, something that Nestiev valued in his review. So I'm going to focus here on, oops, I knew that was going to happen. So here, looking at Remenyuk's lament here. The theme appears, as I stated, in different forms throughout these moments, but most important to the goals of a socialist realist opera is the use of the theme, I believe, in Remenyuk's lament. Here, the theme emerges as a synthesized version of both the tender moments of love expressed by Semyon and Sofia in Act 3, as well as destruction and death at the hands of Tkachenko, the Germans, and the Haidamaks. The connections made here can be highlighted by looking at the opening of the duet scene in Act 3, which I just showed you, and then comparing it here to what we have with Remenyuk. Here in Remeniuk's Lament, we have this foreshadowing of a dip to minor, which was also used in the introduction as well, that kind of half step motion there from C to C flat, then back up to C. So taking us from A flat major to A flat minor, back up to A flat major. We start with the lament, as you would expect, in E flat minor, but it's all very unstable as we get these outlines of a sixth from B flat to D flat and back up again on the phrase drug moi, and as he starts to name his fallen comrade. It's here that the E flat minor quickly gives way to C major as the theme from the Act 3 duet comes into focus. As the phrase continues, the key changes again now to E flat major, duplicating this kind of parallel major minor shift from the theme's opening gesture at the beginning of Act 3, as the phrase closes on a half cadence. And I'll play this section for you here. Here's Remeniuk. Okay, so it continues on. I'm going to move there. The same process unfolds when Remeniuk describes his friend Ivasenko. However, this time the key changes move from E flat minor to C major and then rest on A flat, the key of the Act 3 duet that we saw there. And I'll play this for you as well. I'm drawing these connections between the opening to Act 3. If you know, the love plot is quite central to the beginning of that act, and then all heck really does break loose there towards the end of that act. And then we have Remeniuk kind of eulogizing his fallen comrades here to show ultimately that this kind of symphonic transformation from representation of love to one of brotherhood and comradeship, which moves us away from the physical attraction of Sophia and Semyon to a much more platonic and even possibly a spiritual kind of connection between brothers. Ultimately, I'm trying to show or offer at least some brief observations on the structure of Soviet opera love plots. These observations are by no means exhaustive, but are at least a start to exploring how the love plots connect to socialist realism, rather than serving some auxiliary or peripheral function. The beginnings of the framework can be found in how musicologists and critics handled the love plot in Carmen, effectively de-eroticizing the work in multiple ways and interpreting the opera along strict political and ideological lines. Both Prokofiev and Dzerzhinsky succeeded in certain ways by clearly demarcating the main characters of the love triangles musically, providing the protagonist with folk songs or march-like elements, and giving the antagonist the opposite. More importantly, though, they each provide some sort of transformation by either changing the musical stylings of the protagonist or through different associations for the protagonist's themes associated with love. The transformation serves as the necessary element of reconciliation between the erotic and platonic aspects of love found in literature, and its presence in opera shows how it can be articulated, I think, musically. Hopefully, the love plot can be another part of the many ways through which we assess socialist realism in opera. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. Questions?
There we go. I have a question about the love plot through the socialist realist lens. Would it have been read as something overtly, let's say, romantic or platonic, or would it have been something that was a little bit more kind of semantically open for personal interpretation, or was it let's say being utilized in a certain kind of tool-based way, just like didactic? Was it a teaching mechanism? This is what the bourgeois love affair looks like, or was it simply entertainment?
I don't think it was just simply entertainment. I think it falls kind of in between everything you just said, especially in the 30s. We've got, there in Soviet opera, they're still working out a lot of different things. Nothing is quite final, because even by 1939, when Semyon Kotko is finished, and by 1940, when it's premiered, alongside this opera, Tikhon Khrennikov, who's writing the same kind, or this kind of style of opera comparable to Ivan Dzerzhinsky, and he's not reaping all of the rewards either. So they're still not quite sure what makes Soviet opera. And as the love plots are concerned, I don't think that they didn't have it as worked out as literature did. Literature, I think, it was much more instructive. And that's what Gutkin really talks about, how, literature was so was such an important aspect of kind of forming the culture. Opera, they were still figuring it out. So I think they used love plots in some aspects as, they were entertaining, but they had to also try and give some of this instructive or, transformative, or this transcending aspect of socialist realism. They had to fit the love plot into that a little bit as well. It's why you see Prokofiev at the very end of the opera. You have this beautiful theme, da di da di da, ba da 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 da. That is playing as the chorus sings that theme. We've got this really weird march at the very end of Semyon Kotko that's just kind of humming along, and it's why Israel Nestiev got so, I think, upset with Prokofiev for that, because he loved the opera otherwise. He was very happy with the way that it was symphonically constructed, until we get to the very end, where he kind of just mashes it all together. And you've got to wonder with someone like Prokofiev, why would he mesh all of that together there at the end, except for maybe to in some sense come to terms with what was expected of the opera as well. Also, I mean, Prokofiev, Act 5 is so short in comparison to the behemoth Act 3, which that act is amazing. If you haven't listened to the opera, you should definitely focus in on that act first. But then Act 5, yeah, it feels like you rush all the way through and just, Semyon's off to fight. Okay, everyone is satisfied and happy at the end. We've succeeded in what we came to do. Yeah. I hope that answers, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Other questions? I'll ask a question.
Sure.
So the examples that you presented, could you just, and I know this is somewhat intangible, but could you point out the musical manifestations of the socialist realist doctrine in these examples?
Well, for one example, it's a singable kind of melody, right? I think it's an attractive melody. It's clearly, I don't like to suggest that diatonicism is the only thing about these, but it follows very clearly kind of along diatonic lines, especially when we have this very well presented half cadence, and then we followed up, its structure is very clear as well. We have, what else with it? It's bright. There is optimism in it. It was the theme and subject of Rana Ranyenka, right? Mikola sings it. That's his quote unquote folk song that he sings strumming his guitar there in Act 3. Let's see, what else am I forgetting? I mean, it checks a lot of the boxes, I think. If we're looking at it in terms of kind of what I presented as the marking off all the watchwords, that I think it does check a lot of those boxes as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to the Reminuk examples, right? And for some reason, I was thinking, yes, I hear Prokofiev in it, but it really sounds like sounds like Mussorgsky to me. Mussorgsky. I just hear Boris, and I can't get it out of my head.
Yes.
Do you think that it's this? Sorry, go ahead, Professor Nardiska.
It's absolutely Mussorgsky, and it is. You were talking about the ambiguity, tonal ambiguity, and I saw lament in a ostinato bass with the passing tones, nothing else. Actually, quite rare, quite raw, with no harmonic. I mean, yes. If I may say something also, I know that we tend to speak today about opera and sexuality, right? But I don't know if this is particular thing that makes your point valuable, that Carmen was stripped of sexuality in the Soviet context, for a couple of reasons. Number one, Russians always claimed Carmen on two reasons. Pushkin originated Tsagane, which many believe the prehistory of the Carmen in musical and literary terms. The second is Carmen was so popular in Russia, in the Soviet Union, that you couldn't strip it out. And what I think that maybe, well, also 30 years after the premiere of the Dnieper, there was Shchedrin with Carmen Suite and Plisetskaya, whom you're not going to accuse of stripping sexuality and presenting bourgeois lore. Okay, so of course it's 30 years later, but still. I think Prokofiev modeled on many models before. I was thinking about Stravinsky ballets. I was thinking about his Love for Three Oranges. But I think he always looked for the grand success. And not only him, Carmen was eternal success. And why don't you look for the modeling? I think that would make your point actually more standing. How do you revamp what was for centuries popular, well, 60 years, into the Soviet context?
Right. Well, I know it's
and this is your point. This is your point. But I'm just thinking that about us sexuality. I pictured Circus, the film Circus, and almost in a tight suit, the jumper and so forth. I mean, I don't know. It was different sense of sexuality, and it didn't have to be sexuality at all. It could be romance.
Right.
Well, that's my speculative point. Okay. Thank you for the paper.
Thank you for your points. This gives me a ton to think about, as because I want to keep digging in on a lot of this stuff. Carmen, it's fascinating because yes, there are many types of sexuality. I'm not trying to pin one in particular down or anything like that. I just based on all of the stuff that we've seen about Katharina. And Lady Macbeth, right? Well, yes. No, yes. I mean, I will agree. Shostakovich, I mean, ramped it up to the nth degree, obviously. But Carmen, though, it does. I think that's what they love so much about Bizet, right? It was just open for all kinds of different experiences with it. It didn't have to be so pigeonholed into one thing or the other. And and I think Marina Raku, what she's done with Carmen is quite fascinating as well, to show us all of these. I couldn't fit all of what in a summary of what she's done in looking at the Soviet versions of Carmen, because I didn't even mention Meyerhold and Stanislavski. Those are two very different versions of Carmen on the opera stage in the 20s and the 30s. Stanislavski laying claim to the composer's intentions, right? And Meyerhold doing his usual, well, he revamped so much of it. He even got rid of another member I didn't mention, Michaela, right?
But maybe they actually sexuality of her was attraction, because it was they were able to stay on the edge. And to the point Daniil raised on a social realism, of course. Yep. Negotiating between this and that would be very interesting to add. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor. Yeah.
All right. Let's stay on time. Thank you.